All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us here today afternoon, folks. Very excited to jump into this presentation here with you. So this is part one of a two-part webinar series that Emily and I will be sharing with folks. And so, of course, you can see that today we're going to be talking about virtual engagement for Safe Harbor protocol teams. And with that, Emily, could you jump into the next slide for us so we can offer some introductions of ourselves? So I can just get started off really briefly. Hi, my name is Hunter Beckstrom. I use he, him, and his pronouns, and I am the Prevention Program Coordinator at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. My title might be a little misleading, but I do a lot of work and technical assistance with our Safe Harbor protocol teams across the state as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Hunter, for co-hosting with me today. Thank you all for being here. My name is Emily Singerhouse. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a consultant here with MNCASA from Singerhouse Research Consulting, LLC, and I will be your co-host today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. And before we actually got into our content and everything, just wanted to do really briefly some housekeeping. And then we'd love to hear a little bit from you all. But first and foremost, of course, you all know that the presentation is being recorded. So for folks hopefully watching later on, thanks so much for being in this space with us. But we would love to have folks turn on their camera just to be as engaged as possible. But please do whatever is going to be most comfortable for yourself. Throughout the presentation, we are going to have, as you can see on the slide here, some check-in questions where you can share some information, and we're going to have a couple of polls as well. So during this time, we would love to have folks unmute themselves, but please know that otherwise, always happy to have folks share some information in the chat, general reactions, questions, whatever that might be as well. A couple other pieces, subtitles should be automatically on for folks, but if it's your preference, you can also turn that off at the bottom of the screen for you. And then just a couple of more things is that we are going to save some time at the end if folks do have any questions that Emily and I would love to answer. And then we do have a questionnaire at the very end of the presentation that we would love to have some folks offer some feedback.
All right, so I'm going to give a quick overview of what we're going to be chatting about here today. So to start off, we're going to dive into a brief overview of the project and what brought us to this conversation. Next, we're going to be talking about virtual engagement and how that can show up within your teams, within the systems that reside within your communities, and then your community themselves. So without further ado, let's dive in.
All right, thanks so much, Emily. So just wanted to share a little bit about how we brought ourselves to be offering this presentation to you all today. And again, thanks for everyone that's sharing a little bit about themselves in the chat. And so just diving into this piece a little bit more is that you might recall that the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault had worked pretty closely in a partnership with what was called the Minnesota Youth Sex Trading or MIST project outside of within the University of Minnesota. And through this partnership, we had the opportunity and privilege to meet Emily. And MNCASA, at least I know from my own professional development, had a huge increase in understandings and very beneficial strategies of virtual engagement. And so having this partnership now with Emily, we've really been able to deepen our work within virtual engagement and to help with this area of capacity as well. And so some of the goals of this partnership, and hopefully what you all have seen and noticed a little bit so far, is that Emily and I had the opportunity early on in this contract, so several months ago, we had some meetings with different regional navigators and other folks in this space already to kind of get an idea on the understanding and opportunities and capacity for virtual engagement. And a part of that was Emily really took the lead on really doing some team stakeholder interviews. So with all of these Safe Harbor protocol teams across the state, Emily had the opportunity to connect with a few different folks. And on top of that, also, we really wanted to hear from as many folks as possible. So we actually had surveys that every single team member across the state on our Safe Harbor protocol teams could offer some feedback in terms of virtual engagement and how folks might have some more opportunities and capacity built for that. A few more things is that I'm very excited to see this, but based upon all of this feedback, Emily is going to be creating some very unique and specialized reports for every single Safe Harbor protocol team to then implement within their own unique communities, just because you all know in this space, being experts yourselves, that you can't directly apply what one community is doing within your own. So Emily being able to offer these unique reports for every team is going to be very cool to see. And then of course, we have these webinars as well. So today's webinar and then next Wednesday as well. So really just wanted to offer a little bit of a background for folks here.
So we've alluded to the term virtual engagement so far in the presentation. So we wanted to first get a pulse on how familiar you all are with virtual engagement. So we're going to submit a poll, should be popping up on your screens here in just a moment. So the question is, how familiar are you with virtual engagement? And some of the options are going to be, I'm an expert, I know everything there is to know about virtual engagement, I know what to do, but I could always learn a little bit more. Some folks could be neutral, they might know some, and then some might say, I don't even know where to start. So Hunter, let me know if I need to jump in for this little poll.
Yes, and I will request Megan, if you're able to share the poll here. It's giving me a bit of an error, unfortunately. So Megan, if you could share that, that would be wonderful.
Fantastic. Thank you, Megan. So you should see it on your screens now. We're just getting a little pulse on how familiar you currently are with virtual engagement.
And if that is not the case, we would love to hear some feedback in the chat, just to hear a little bit if our poll isn't going to work here. So if folks just wanted to share in the chat how familiar they are, again, maybe Emily, if you could share some of those options, but really seeing the spectrum of expertise that folks might already have in terms of virtual engagement would be lovely to see.
Yeah, and it looks like we have the poll has been published. We've got a spectrum of folks, some who are neutral, some who know some, and some who don't quite know where to start yet. So that's really good to know for us as we start off with this presentation. So we know where you're all sitting and how far in depth we need to go with our explanations. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing these poll results. And then to dive into what exactly virtual engagement is, so we are all on the same page while we dive into the project and the rest of the presentation. The way we like to describe it is interactions in the online space between people or organizations to conduct activities and build relationships. So that's kind of a nuanced definition to the idea of virtual engagement, which is also a new topic on its own. It's been published in ideas of like online engagement, virtual community engagement, digital communication, all that jazz. But really, we're looking at the virtual space on its own and for those specific reasons of conducting activities and building relationships. So some common virtual engagement technologies can be separated into three options. So communication tools, coordination tools, and information repositories. So communication tools can be like Zoom, Gmail, Instagram, things that you can communicate verbally via video conferencing, audio conferencing, or via text on social media and email and stuff like that. There's also coordination tools like shared calendars, things that help you adjust your workflow. And those can be things like Asana, if you've ever heard of that before. It's like a task management software, and Basecamp, which is helpful for managing projects. Then there's also information repositories. As I said, you can think of OneDrive, Dropbox, and like Google Drive to have those shared files and databases. So essentially, virtual engagement is this piece where we utilize tools and resources to communicate a message, complete tasks, and connect with others. So this is kind of the lens that we're taking through this conversation today and what we based this project off of and all of the resources and activities that we've done within this project as well.
All right, thanks so much, Emily. And I just did want to offer a little bit of a general agenda. I know that Emily kind of touched on this a little bit as well, but I'm really glad that we have an overall definition of what we mean by virtual engagement, just because it can be a very abstract definition as well. So thanks so much for that, Emily. But throughout this, it really talks about how we are really going to apply and think about our options for virtual engagement within these three main categories of teams in itself, systems, and then the wider community as well. So you're going to see ways in which there's going to be some similarities and how you can apply that across all these three different categories, and then the unique ways in which each, for example, a team might utilize is very different than a system discipline, for example. So we're really going to dive into those three categories, and to finish up, we're actually going to dive into a case study, which I'm actually really excited to share with folks about. It's going to be really good. And that is really the agenda that we wanted to share with folks today.
Awesome. Thank you, Hunter. So within this project, we looked into virtual engagement from the lens of 4 areas of anti-trafficking teams. And so anti-trafficking teams can sometimes be categorized within 4 areas, such as internal foundations, operations, and collaboration, case operations, data reporting and assessments, and then public and community engagement, awareness, training, and prevention. So these are the 4 pieces we examined as part of this project and within this presentation to better understand how we can create resources and materials to better integrate the use and concept of virtual engagement within each one. So to break those down even more, the internal foundations, operations, and collaboration. So this can look like creating different internal systems and processes for interacting with one another, or efforts that can contribute to the way that teams function. For example, meetings, the ways that you communicate and collaborate on projects, some rules and regulations around how you communicate with one another, that type of thing. And to look deeper into that, our project utilized those interviews that some of you were participating in and surveys to generate these reports to kind of understand the way that these internal foundations, operations, and collaboration can better integrate with virtual engagement. In addition to that as well, those same interviews and surveys that I mentioned before looked into different case operations within protocol teams. So the functions and ways that you respond to different cases within your communities, that can look like protocol development. So having that victim-centered investigation, confidentiality, referral system, all that type of stuff. So we looked into how exactly these case operations took place and the ways that you all interacted with one another. And we will be diving into that for those reports that you will receive, along with resources created around understanding how virtual engagement can interact with protocols and compliances that you may have to follow, and also a resource on 3 phases of systems change to utilize virtual engagement in a way that can help with this case operation area. Next was that data reporting and assessment piece. So these are things that describe the activities of the team. So the events, the meetings that take place, the initiatives that you take on and what you accomplish, and measuring the ways that that is accomplished, analyzing it, and then integrating it into the ways that protocol and other activities are developed. So again, with those interviews and surveys, we were able to better understand how that took place, And so hopefully our next webinar, which I hope to see you all at as well, we'll dive into how to integrate virtual engagement into this area. And then also we created some awesome resources and infographics that we're excited to share with you to address this too. Now, the last area, public and community engagement, awareness, training, and prevention, which is one of the most uncommon areas that protocol teams tend to engage in, yet it can be one of the most powerful. And so with the project, we were really hoping to better understand different ways that community engagement can take place within the protocol teams, since they're so uniquely positioned to do so. So we were looking at activities that fall outside of the team's regular and ongoing communication and response to cases, how you engage with the community and why, and then external and outward facing efforts to engage with the community through training, awareness, and outreach. So a lot of those interviews and surveys that we focused on within this project really had the lens coming from that.
Thanks so much, Emily. And I think that piece right there is really important, because we know that we have a lot of folks who are experts in the room. I know that I see a lot of familiar faces and names that are very in tune and familiar with protocol. But as this presentation really spells out and how we can really utilize virtual engagement as just another tool in our toolbox, and really to think creatively and outside of the box when we are doing some of these community engagement strategies. But looking at the slide here, you may recall that my role is as the prevention program coordinator here at MNCASA. And so no matter what space I am within, I really like to offer a prevention lens to any type of work that I'm doing, even with our Safe Harbor protocol teams. And I think it's really important that, teams in so whether that is Safe Harbor protocol teams or any type of teaming organization, being aware that they are truly uniquely positioned to really prevent occurrences of course, youth exploitation, but also trafficking, sex trading, and any other type of violence. But to be very clear, of course, a lot of folks on Safe Harbor protocol teams or sexual assault response teams, their primary role is to respond and intervene on these situations of harm, right? However, I think as you see on this slide, we really have to touch on the fact that prevention and response can really work in tandem together. And I really love this analogy and this image, and even more so because one of our colleagues here at MNCASA kind of developed this analogy. But it really speaks to this idea that prevention and a response to sexual harm can really work together and can happen concurrently, just like the wheels on a bicycle that you see here on the screen. And so to break this down a little bit, we have the wheels, of course, which provide movement and direction for the work that we do. However, the back wheel, which is prevention, for example, really drives our response and pedals us forward in all of our work. On the other hand, that front wheel, which is response, really directs how we move towards victims and survivors in that present moment of intervention or response. And we're always keeping our prevention strategies really in the back of our mind when we are responding to violence. So I think it's really important to kind of have this analogy in the back of our head that even when we are responding and intervening, we can implement strategies of primary prevention, because we know that responding and constantly intervening on these situations oftentimes is not sustainable. So we do want to take that step forward to be proactive in these examples as well. And here you might recall that how we were discussing that Safe Harbor protocol teams and other types of teams are very uniquely situated to do some of this community level prevention work. And what you see here on the screen is actually a model called the social ecological model, which has been developed by the CDC. And it's really important here because it really demonstrates that there are 4 different types of environments in which you can actually do prevention, or really any other type of work, honestly. So breaking these down, of course, we have the individual level, which is that of ourselves. We have the relationship level, which is kind of our close inner circle with our family and friends. We also have the community level, which quite honestly is very broad. So you really can think about that in examples of schools, our workplaces, and locally shared spaces like parks, but it can also even be a neighborhood or an entire town or a city as well. And then finally, we have the societal level, of course, too. And going back to the reason why Safe Harbor protocol teams are so uniquely situated here is because they are in that community level, but they're not just, one organization. There are multiple intersecting systems involved with Safe Harbor protocol teams. And so it is much easier if they are doing virtual engagement or engagement overall in the community. It's much easier for those folks to influence others at the relationship and individual level rather than an individual trying to influence community. So if you're able to really demonstrate some of those new values to reduce harm, prevent harm, and new values of a culture of consent, for example, having those ideals will be a lot easier to influence the folks on the other end of the spectrum with individuals and at the relationship level. So really just kind of keeping in mind some of these unique opportunities you as a Safe Harbor protocol team or overall team in general can utilize and implement.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hunter. So to dive into virtual engagement in teams and what that can look like, we can start off by thinking about the 3 different ways that there is effective response to sexual exploitation and even just trafficking or trading and really any sort of sexual violence at its core. We can think of protocol development, interagency coordination, and community outreach. So the 2, protocol development and interagency coordination, are 2 of the most primary utilized avenues to respond to sexual exploitation. However, there is that idea, as I mentioned before, of community outreach being a really key piece. And for teams, this is a really interesting avenue for them to go down to integrate virtual engagement in a new type of way. So thinking about how can virtual engagement help make Safe Harbor protocol teams be more effective, we can break it down through a few different ways. 1, through collaboration. So thinking about collaborating with your team members, your facilitators, those who host the meetings, interacting with one another. It can help be more effective through increasing shared leadership of the tasks and efforts that you are all conducting together, whether that be protocol development in itself, training on that protocol, and outreaching to others to coordinate resources, services, and response to exploitation. And to stem off of that as well is that resource sharing piece within one another. Virtual engagement can help increase that and enhance that through easeability and access to those resources. Next, to tie that all together in a way is that foundational piece of communication, which virtual engagement is most commonly associated with. And that is a really easy way to help Safe Harbor protocol teams be more effective. It's by utilizing those different avenues for communication to enhance the work you're already doing. Next, education. So educating team members on your discipline, the policies and protocols within your own discipline, and how that plays as a role in your team. And then support as well. So supporting one another in the work that you do, both within the efforts and activities that you're doing, but also it can help support one another, both emotionally and physically, because it is quite draining sometimes to do this type of work. And so to reduce burnout and turnover, it's important to rely on the different types of engagement that can take place to make sure there's different options for folks to engage in ways that make them feel most comfortable. So thinking about all these different avenues that can help virtual engagement can help the teams be more effective, we can look at as well some different examples of platforms that are helpful in enhancing the work of protocol teams. For example, Zoom, what we're using today. Similarly as well, Teams is a really common one. Basecamp I mentioned before, which is a really awesome platform that helps with project management, team management, sharing calendars, sharing documents, whatever it may be. It's a really awesome one-stop shop for everything. MailChimp can be a really interesting way to send out newsletters to your team members on the activities that you have going on the protocol that's being developed, any events that you have, and information on the meetings. Next, Gmail and or other types of communication platforms are really helpful in making Safe Harbor Protocol teams more effective. And then Dropbox as well, having that central place where documents can be shared is really important for a cohesive team to have that place where you always can rely on to go find that document when you need it. Have any of you folks used any of these platforms before? Feel free to unmute or drop in the chat if this is something that you're familiar with. If not, is there something on here that you haven't heard of before?
We've used Teams before. I think that's just having the shared drive, like you said, is really beneficial at times, especially when sharing documents that are quite large, walking through protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. Teams is a really awesome platform, especially to communicate quickly as well. So having that little ping that you can just really quickly do to somebody really is helpful to increase that accessibility to others while also respecting the professionalism of the work, where you're not, texting somebody. It's kind of that same similar vibe, except a little bit more easier to use. And as you said, Andrea, that shared document space can be really helpful. So OneDrive is another great place where a lot of states typically use OneDrive or SharePoint. Some folks call it. So depending on your team and where you're based out of or the disciplines that you're a part of, the platforms can be dependent on that. So for example, some folks can't use Dropbox or Google. They can only use OneDrive. Some folks can only use Google, whatever it may be. There's different platforms that can help engage with different teams. Oh, and Andrea said that she's also used Canva and Mentimeter, Microsoft Forms, Doodle Polls, Prezi, etc. So quite a variety of different platforms. Love that Doodle Poll piece because that's a really great way to schedule with other people. Most of us are probably familiar with Doodle Poll, but essentially it's a platform that you can select an option of availability to have a meeting or event or whatever it may be. And you can see other people's availability as well. Mentimeter, I actually haven't used before, but I've heard a lot of really great things about it. Andrea, how have you used Mentimeter?
It's really helpful in presentations we have 2 protocol teams in my region, one of which is just starting out for the most part. So using Mentimeter, you can use it as a slideshow platform, but it's interactive. So the audience can pull out their phones or device and then they get to interact. So you can put like questions, how comfortable do you feel? People can do reactions on the slide content, or they can answer or respond to some of the responses that you've put out there. So it's like a more interactive way than just like the basic poll. You can do like big text or word clouds or other fun things. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's actually a really great example of different ways that you can increase engagement within your teams if you are doing virtual or hybrid meetings, is by having platforms like Mentimeter or Prezi to have a little bit more engaging way to communicate with others in the virtual space. All right, well, thanks folks for participating in that quick little check-in. So thinking about the ways that virtual engagement in teams can take place, I want to do a quick overview of some things that teams will need to engage virtually. And trust is a really big one. So trust is an important binder of a team. And during that interview process that we had with protocol teams across the state, we found that trust was a really, really important strength within teams that kind of kept them going and being able to produce the protocol in the first place. So trust building is sometimes a really slow process to develop. However, teams can really use this to facilitate different trust building exercises and activities. Virtual engagement is a great way to do that. And so teams who are engaging virtually, building that trust through those team building activities is going to be really key. So for example, having chat sessions like we are in this presentation, as Andrea said, having that Mentimeter where you can physically engage with your phone and give your input, having that space, I guess, to allow your team members to share a little bit more about themselves, to have a little bit more vulnerability and authenticity can really help increase motivation and effort within team activities. And so that is also seen through an openness to explore different ways of engaging. So having trust within your team and your team members can look like being open to trying different activities to enhance the work that you're already doing. So this is a really key piece that I like to start off with when engaging or when talking about how teams engaging in virtual engagement, one of those key things that they will need. Next is self-efficacy. So having that attitude of we can do this. I feel comfortable stepping up to the plate and taking pieces of that pie. Having that self-efficacy attitude really can encourage folks to do different activities and different work that they might not normally be doing. And also finding solutions to different obstacles or challenges that may arise within the team. So not every single team is perfect. Not every team has zero conflict. It's a smooth ride every time. That's not always the case. And very rarely is that the case. There's always going to be conflict in some way, shape, or form. But having that self-efficacy and want to find the solution when obstacles arise is going to be really helpful. So virtual engagement is not an easy task to take on. It's not like, it is like riding a bike, I guess. You kind of have to keep going with it, trying different things that make it work for you. And so having team building exercises through virtual engagement platforms can be really helpful when utilizing virtual engagement. So having hybrid meetings that you have that engagement piece of building trust and other just like team building activities of icebreakers and stuff like that at the beginning of meetings can be really helpful when you use virtual engagement. Next, having shared experience. So virtual teams and groups are likely to be successful together, especially if they engage in activities that kind of overcome the lack of opportunities to have shared experience in a virtual space. So often when we do rely on virtual, we are always spread out. We're hardly in the same room together. So teams who are engaging virtually will need to take up opportunities to help increase that shared experience. So shared experience on its own helps facilitate the development of two internal processes for teams. So one is sharing that like mental model of understanding of what you're doing. So for example, knowing the tasks that you're going to be taking place, knowing the goals of the team and responsibilities, that shared experience helps facilitate that understanding. Next is that transactive memory. So knowing what each team member is good at, what each team member brings to the table, and all of their unique expertise that take place really helps rely on this shared experience. So increasing that shared experience, like I said, helps increase mental models and then that transactive memory of each team member. And this is going to be really important for teams who especially are multidisciplinary, as all protocol teams are, to build that shared vocabulary and understanding of the different work styles that we all have. A health professional is going to work very differently than a school professional. Understanding that difference can really help contribute to shared experiences. All right, next is shared leadership. So this is similar to the shared experience piece, except we're looking on different ways that team members help share the efforts that take place within the team rather than relying on one person. And through this presentation, I was able to find that research on virtual teams found that traditional and that like hierarchical leadership is not very significant to enhancing team performance. It's actually a shared leadership style. So having that structural support provides stability for teams and reduces some of that like ambiguity of not really knowing who's going to step up to the plate in virtual environments. There's always that moment where you try to unmute and then somebody is already talking and then it gets really awkward. So having shared leadership over the ways that meetings and other activities take place can be really helpful to reduce some of that ambiguity and then support more stability within your team. And lastly, team management. So this can look like the different ways that your team facilitates their efforts and activities. And this heavily relies on collaboration technologies, as I said before. So like email, Zoom, document sharing, that type of thing. And so for team management, this really boils down to the nature of the work that you're doing. So when it comes to addressing trafficking and youth exploitation, things can get very difficult and very complex. So oftentimes teams are separated into work groups to tackle different issues or do different activities together. Usually it's really easy if you're working with somebody that you work with on a daily basis. So for example, somebody who's in your discipline, that does help reduce some confusing communication or that cross-sectoral language that really isn't there. However, it's important for teams who are engaging virtually to have that mix of work groups. So people from many different disciplines coming together is going to be really important to ensure responsive communications across teams and across sectors so people are more flexible to work on tasks together. So really trying to understand ways that manage your teams in a way that you have that cross-sectoral collaboration. It's going to be really important when engaging virtually. There was that Teams bit that we talked about here in a little bit before. So like teams such as Microsoft Teams, being able to have that regular and explicit communication between one another is a really great way to be more effective and get that work done. So you can update folks on what you're doing, how it's going, all the different projects that you have going on. So different ways that teams can be managed is going to be really important to look at when engaging online. I'm going to take a quick pause here. Hunter, am I missing anything? I know this is kind of a lot to keep in mind. Is there anything that you would want to add, Hunter?
I think something that's just resonating with me is this idea of like shared experience, leadership, and knowledge within teams, because that's to say that not one single individual or system discipline should be taking on the bulk of virtual engagement work. We know that there's plenty of systems that might have some difficulty in eliminating some of those barriers, such as our governmental agencies. There's a lot of barriers in place for folks to do that, but finding what you can do instead to better engage with the community to then help the folks that might have more opportunity to do so. So really ensuring that this is shared, I think that's a really important point to bring in here, Emily.
Awesome. Thank you, Hunter. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And so again, just thinking about some virtual engagement for our teams, we really just want to talk about, again, that this is just one more tool to add to your toolbox. Hopefully, with all the skills that y'all already are bringing into this space today, we can just enhance and sharpen some of those ideas, because again, this is for everyone within that space, right? So it's our teams, our systems, and then also our community as well. So we know that people come from very different perspectives and backgrounds. So some folks might have some more professional development in these areas, but then going back to our last slide of a shared experience, we really want to be able to come to this with some shared power.
Yes, absolutely. Virtual engagement is not a standalone activity. It's not the end all to be all for your team. This is not the only method you use. The way we try to approach it here at MNCASA and through my consulting work is that it's one tool of many that can help support you in all the activities that you're going to do and enhance some of the differences that you all have to come together. So we've kind of touched on this already, but let's get a quick pulse on if your team has ever engaged virtually. And if so, maybe drop in the chat how you do it. So we've got some options of, yes, we have engaged virtually. Yes, but only with Zoom or email. No, you've never engaged virtually. And then the last option as well is that you are unsure. So we're going to wait about 45 seconds to a minute to see what folks have to say. And then we'll go on and share the results once we hear back from them. Okay, awesome. So we've got the results up on your screen. We've got a fair bit of folks who have engaged virtually. Most of you have only engaged really with Zoom or email, and that's totally fine. That's a great place to start off. And then one folks who has never engaged virtually. So thanks for joining us today. So hopefully you can get some inspiration for how you can start engaging. So I am going to close out the poll here. Just to confirm, you were able to get the results on your screen, correct? Yes. Okay. Cool beans. Awesome. Well, I'm going to close out the poll. And then we're going to move on to our next section here about systems. So virtual engagement within systems. And when I say systems, you might be thinking to yourself, what the heck is that? So let me explain that for you. When I say systems, I'm thinking people who are not currently sitting on your team. So your MDT, your protocol team, your interagency council, whatever it may be, those folks who are not currently members, but yet still contributing to serving the public, and those who can work to prevent, intervene, and increase wellness for sexually exploited youth. For example, other advocacy organizations who might not be a part of the team, social services support, culturally specific organizations, local departments like the library, transportation, parks and rec, the schools, all that jazz. This is also including other teams that might be within your community, for example, coalitions, MDTs, SARTs, other folks who are working to prevent and intervene and respond to exploitation, but not currently sitting on your team. And so one of the reasons why this is important is because there's a lot of protective factors within the ideas of system coordination and collaboration. Having that within the community has a really strong basis for increasing the effectiveness of your response. Working not in silos is really key as well. So specifically for teams working on criminal justice and system responses, some of the research showed that having that multi-sector collaboration can be really, really helpful when tackling tough social issues. So let's take a moment to put into chat. Let's see if you all have some ideas or guesses or experiences on what virtual engagement can look like when engaging with your system partners. So I'm going to take a moment to pause then and see what folks have to say, if they've ever experienced this before, or if they have any ideas on what virtual engagement can look like when with your system partners. And if you feel comfortable unmuting, feel free to jump in that way as well.
Can I just say it here in the—
Go for it. Yeah.
Just like, yeah, because I'm just too lazy to type it out. So, you know, we did a panel with survivors about a year and a half ago. And we had about, 3 or 4 survivors look at our protocol and just comment on it and give us a lot of ideas. And so we had them come and discuss, what their impressions were of our protocol to our team. And so we did that kind of just by a Zoom meeting with the rest of our team, and it worked really well. So that's just something we had done, and it was easy because we had survivors from throughout the state, and so it wouldn't have been feasible to do it in person anyway. So
that's excellent. Thank you for sharing. It's a great way to get folks involved within the protocol development, or if you're looking back and seeing how you can maybe make changes based on the way your communities look today. So thank you for sharing, John. There's a lot of different ways that folks can engage with your system partners. For one, we like to think of training as being one of the most important reasons why you would engage with your system partners, and having virtual engagement as an option to do so can be very helpful. So for example, training on different practices that your discipline currently follows within your protocol, disseminating the protocol itself, and then having some hybrid trainings, webinars, and videos is a really easy way to utilize virtual engagement with your system partners. Next, we've got collaboration. So like I said before, having that multi-sector coordination can be really helpful. As John said as well, coordinating with others across the state can be really beneficial too. So having that ability to connect with folks who might not be in your community can be really helpful in collaborating on your protocol and create a more comprehensive development of what your response looks like. So for example, somebody in Northwest Minnesota might have some ideas on ways that they can get started with protocol development. Then they can easily collaborate with somebody down in Olmsted County who's very far away from them, but there's still that ease and ability to communicate. So virtual engagement can really help build that comprehensiveness, that connection with one another, and learning from one another as well. Shared resources is a really great example as well. So not really reinventing the wheel, but leveraging the resources that you already have available to your team. So for example, having the ability to post on Facebook might not be possible for everybody, but you still want to maybe share an event that you have going on, or a community roundtable or something like that. you can share in the resources with somebody in your system who does have those virtual engagement resources. In addition as well, there's the ability to virtually share and disseminate what resources your team has to offer with your system partners too. There are some challenges that come with that. For example, some disagreement in the way that things can take place, and breaking the status quo, or sometimes even territorialism over what resources are shared and which are not, can be kind of hard to navigate within systems, but definitely is possible within the virtual engagement realm. And again, that shared knowledge of the issue. So knowing what exactly the protocol does, who your team is, what you all do, and increasing the awareness of the team in itself can be really helpful and can be enhanced with virtual engagement. So again, not leveraging, not reinventing the wheel, but leveraging what you already have available. So here are 4 really simple ways that virtual engagement can take place in teams. Hunter, is there anything that you would add to this?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. What is standing out to me right now is actually how we talk about within our Safe Harbor protocol teams, for example, is actually a communication feedback loop, right? So if we keep all our fantastic ideas within the team itself, and if we're not actually having those representatives bring it back to their own organizations, there's no actually understanding of what's going on. There's no impact in the broader community about, wow, these folks are doing some really fantastic work. And I think this can translate perfectly to outside engaging with these systems, right? So whether that is in the community or across the state or with neighboring states, right? We have plenty of folks that are border counties and working with other potential statewide trafficking task force as well. And so really ensuring that there's, again, some more shared knowledge being dispersed outside of that space, because if the broader community has no idea about these really great ideas, the work that is going on, then it just stops there. So really ensuring that there's going to be some more communication and more engagement, and also virtual engagement in those spaces as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Hunter. So I kind of went over this a little bit, but I'll just highlight as well. There's ability to discover new partners within your community that you might not have already connected with, because you have that ability to have that collaboration and communication. They might attend some of your trainings. There's a few different ways that you can discover new partners to assist you with the goals that you have coming up. Like I said, shared resources and knowledge. And this is a really interesting one here, identifying funding opportunities to pursue together. So if your team wanted to go for a grant or something like that, you can communicate and collaborate with others within your community or across the state as well to pursue that funding together. So here are some examples of different platforms that can be used. Like I said before, Zoom is a really common one. Basecamp can be really easy to engage with folks and other teams in your community to manage different projects and activities that you would like to do. MailChimp can be a great way to disseminate the ongoings of your team and disseminate the protocol, describe the events that you have going on or any ongoing trainings that you may have. Gmail, like I said, just a regular communication software, and radio is a really interesting way to engage with systems. So when I say radio, we're thinking like your local public radio, somebody who might have a podcast in your area to help disseminate some of the activities that you have to your team members and your system involved folks. So let's take a look at a quick example to try to break this down a little bit more. So a team has the goal of ensuring new people are trained on the trafficking protocol as soon as they enter their position. Thinking about what we've talked about so far, would anybody like to guess what some ways that they could reach this goal by utilizing virtual tools? the question in the chat, but what are some ways that they can reach this goal by using virtual tools? If anybody has any ideas or brainstorms, Annie said, having recorded trainings available for onboarding. That is exactly right. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. That's the first one I have here. Zoom to record the video of the training to have for onboarding. Next, YouTube to post the video so it's accessible long-term. So folks who are onboarding into this, they are able to access that film. OneDrive to have those related historical documents, written protocol, and contact information available. And then Zoom again, if folks wanted to have a biannual hybrid training to host some office hours for folks who are new to their discipline or to that position that's implementing protocol, and connect with others who created it. All right, so I just want to really quick go over this concept here called technology readiness, and this is something that we would like to keep in mind, especially when engaging externally with your team within systems, communities, and then also within your team as well. So technology readiness is the different levels of ability and comfort to use or adopt technology within your efforts. So everybody has different feelings of comfort that they want to utilize technology in. And I just want to remind you all that there is room for all of us to connect in our own ways. So that can look like building off of what's already in place. Not, like I said, not reinventing the wheel. We don't really have time for that. Let's build off of what's already here. Next, let's lean into others if you need help or support, or you need help and support figuring out ways that you can create more options for others. And then lastly, remember your values as well. So that is one of the key pieces of virtual engagement is your values and why you're doing what you're doing, and ensuring that you create a space that's accessible for as many people as you can is really, really important. So I'm going to speed it up here just a little bit. So I'm going to skip this next chat, and we're going to dive into the next section here. And this is virtual engagement for communities. So virtual engagement in communities can look like engaging with the public. So for example, regular civilians like youth, families, elders, and also local businesses such as hotels, grocery stores, bars and restaurants, all those types of folks. We found that MDTs with cases that had community partners were 3 times more likely to result in substantiated allegations, took on an average 1.72 days longer to investigate cases, but had more documented contact with others to have a better outcome within the case. So the difference is between those MDTs that were virtual versus in-person was actually quite striking, because they were able to have more opportunities to engage with other community members, such as families, in ways that were more accessible to them. For example, say you live in a rural community. It's not very easy to come down to City Hall or something like that to share information. Having the ability to connect online can be easier for folks. So have you ever connected with community members virtually before? Has your team ever engaged with community members virtually? Feel free to unmute if you'd like. I know Andrea said earlier in the chat that you've hosted community education trainings, protocol team tablings at community events, which is really interesting. So I'm assuming you might have went to a community event and set up a table there to talk about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, it was just an idea. I don't know that we've actually done a table with COVID, but we do out of Goodhue have like a community brochure that we share like our protocol, what our mission is, who's all on it, how to get connected, the good work we're doing. So just another little tool, but in the future, it would be great to be tabling.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get to that point at some point. And thank you for sharing that, Andrea. There are a few different ways that we can engage with community members. And that can look like training, education and awareness on the topic of exploitation and trafficking and violence in general, and the response of the protocol team, what that actually looks like. Feedback, so giving feedback on what exactly the protocol is doing and how it's affecting communities. Like John said, they engaged with survivors to get feedback on your protocol. That's a really great way to get community members involved. And then prevention as well. So prevention can look like working to do culture change messaging, change the way that communities are thinking about violence and exploitation, to work together to reduce that as many ways that we can. So virtual engagement in communities can reach people in groups that are missed by traditional engagement methods. So folks who are unable to make it to the places that you are currently engaging at, or for folks who are unsure about if they want to participate or not, virtual engagement can help bridge that gap. Additionally, it can help you assist community members with accessing services, resources, education, materials, all that fun stuff. And then also give a space to garner more community buy-in and support of your team and what exactly you're doing, and help build relationships, which is really nice. All right, like I said, we are going a little bit fast here, so I do apologize for that. So feel free to drop your question in the chat in case you want me to slow down or say something again. But here are some forms of virtual engagement that are helpful for teams to engage with the community with, and that's Zoom, Instagram, sorry, it says Basecamp on there, Facebook, Gmail, and radio. All right, so now we're into kind of a bulky section here of the case study, and I'm going to turn it over to Hunter.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emily. I think all the content that you dove into was incredibly necessary and helpful, just because I think a lot of folks, as we noticed with the poll, have either already done a lot of virtual engagement or have kind of like, oh, I might have done that, but I'm not totally sure. So I think one purpose, in addition to what we've already talked about, another purpose of this presentation is just to kind of turn on the light bulb or shed light on the fact that folks are already oftentimes doing virtual engagement on their team or in their community. And so now we really want to offer some very concrete examples of what that can look like. And again, want to be clear that you can see that our case study is for Polk County, Minnesota. And so we're going to dive in a little bit here. But before that, just knowing that, of course, some of the ideas and strategies and examples we come up with certainly might not be able to be directly applied to your own community, but knowing with the skills that you have already developed and what you have now through this presentation can maybe tweak them or apply them a little bit differently to work best for your own community and the folks that you serve as well. So here, we really want to offer, again, some of those direct strategies, and that is going to be for Polk County, Minnesota here. And so just wanted to share a couple of caveats. Number one is that I have only researched Polk County. I've never been there. I am not familiar other than all the Google searches that Emily and I have been doing within this community in Polk County. Additionally, we had purposely chosen Polk County, Minnesota, because to our knowledge, there's no type of safe harbor protocol team located in this community. So just wanted to share some of those thoughts there. But on the next slides, we're actually going to see, first of all, a community snapshot. Thank you, Emily. And then also we're going to kind of look at the prevalence of trafficking and sex trading through looking at the Minnesota Student Survey data. And then we're also going to try to develop our own safe harbor protocol team in Polk County and then finish up with some very concrete strategies. So here we see a snapshot of where Polk County is located. So you can see that it is located in northwestern Minnesota. on the left-hand side of your screen. The county seat there is Crookston, Minnesota, and the population is just over 30,000. And I think this piece is important just because we have several counties across the state that actually already have a safe harbor protocol developed. That's kind of within that 30 to 50,000 population range. So again, although you can't directly apply some of these examples, again, kind of considering how this is a smaller, more rural area might be able to help you shed some light on what you can do within your community if it's kind of similar in this range. Additionally, just wanted to share that within this county here in Polk County, we have a neighboring area that is Grand Forks County, North Dakota, and a part of that is Grand Forks, Minnesota, and this is actually a metro area, so one of the more larger metro areas in these areas of Minnesota and North Dakota here. All right, so a lot of folks are probably familiar with this image that we have here on the screen. So this is actually a breakdown of 2019 data from the Minnesota Student Survey. And one second, just in case folks are not familiar, just wanted to share a link to learn a little bit more about the Minnesota Student Survey if you're not familiar, but this 2019 data really breaks down the 9 different safe harbor regions when youth had answered yes to the question if they've ever traded sex for housing, drugs, food, or essentially anything of value. And we're seeing that on average, this data was, it said that the average was about 1.4% of youth across the state of Minnesota had actually answered and self-disclosed yes to this question. And so based upon those numbers, that was about 5,000 youth that had answered yes to this question. A couple of pieces here, and just want to uplift in the chat what Emily has shared, that you can actually access your own data from your own community and any other community across the state via that link. So thanks so much, Emily, for sharing that. But a couple of pieces here I just want to share is that really again, just to offer a quick background, the MSS was really started in 1989, and it happens every 3 years for students in 5th, 8th, 9th, and 11th grades, really asking about a ton of different experiences for young students. But really, I think it is important to be aware of some of the limitations of the Minnesota Student Survey. And that's just, we know it's likely an underestimate due to some limitations, that the number of 5,000 youth who have traded sex, at least in 2019, is likely an underestimate, for reasons being that, the MSS is not strictly required across the state. It's only administered on one certain day for schools. Additionally, it doesn't address students who are like dropouts as well. It is only in English, and we know that, youth who are either in the life or at risk of being in the life, typically they're not getting their basic needs met. So school might oftentimes not be an actual priority. So just keeping in mind that these are some of the rates that we are seeing across the state of Minnesota, at least in 2019. All right, and here we just wanted to share specifically what we have discovered in Polk County in 2019. And so you can see that just 9th and 11th graders were asked this question of, have you ever traded sex or sexual activity to receive money, food, drugs, alcohol, a place to stay, or really anything else of value? And so we're seeing that again, this was for male and masculine identified and female and feminine identified students. And in 9th grade, that number was between 1 and 2%. However, for 11th grade, we're seeing a pretty significant jump, right? And so even though that's just 1 or 2 percentage points, that's a pretty significant increase. And a couple of important pieces that I want to note from this is, traditionally, folks might assume that women, girls, and female and feminine identified folks are experiencing this at much higher rates. However, we're seeing here in Polk County that it's the same for male and masculine identified students, and the same as female and feminine identified students. So I think that piece is very, very important here. And so breaking down the numbers based upon the students and the grade numbers who had actually taken this, we find that I think there's about 13 total students that had answered yes to this question. However, keep in mind that that's not including any other grades other than 9th and 11th graders. And again, that these numbers are likely an underestimate. So I know that we are running short on time, so I might fly through some of these, but just keeping in mind that we know that the 11th graders reported at 3%, and Northwestern Minnesota is the highest at 2% compared to all the other safe harbor regions. So we know that students in Polk County are experiencing this at even higher rates than in Northwestern Minnesota as well. All right, so here I'll go pretty quickly through this, but this is just talking about creating our own safe harbor protocol team here in Polk County. On the slide, you see typically what are the 7 main categories of different disciplines within safe harbor protocol teams. So folks are typically pretty familiar with that. So I'll have us jump on to the next slide. All right, but this is us actually developing our own team in Polk County. So breaking this down a little bit, of course, this is not an exhaustive list, and certainly we know that multiple different organizations could be within here too, but we're seeing schools from Crookston Public Schools, a couple of different advocacy organizations in Polk County, multiple different forms of healthcare providers, and then also the primary child protection team there in Polk County, Minnesota. And then a few other categories. We have a few different jurisdictions for law enforcement being Crookston PD, East Grand Forks PD, and the Polk County Sheriff's Office. We have a couple of folks from the prosecution and legal category, and then finally finishing up with probation and corrections there. So we can see here that even though there's about 30,000 folks in Polk County, we have over a dozen different organizations that could actually be on this team. And of course, multiple personnel from these different organizations and disciplines. So even with 30,000 folks in the county, this could be already a pretty large team in and of itself. However, just wanted to say we probably won't have time for this chat. I want to make sure folks have time for questions at the end. We know that that couldn't be a full-on list of folks that might be a part of this. So of course, very important to have our regional navigators on our teams. So here we would have our Northwest Regional Navigator, which would actually be Angela Larson from Support Within Reach. Additionally, some other considerations for folks like Emily was talking about before, talking about our other systems that could be on the team as well. Actually surrounding Polk County, we have quite a large indigenous population being from Red Lake Reservation and White Earth Reservation. And so certainly that has implications about who are the victims and survivors our Safe Harbor Protocol team and response services might see, and certainly changes how we might have to address victims and survivors differently depending on the needs that those folks require as well. And additionally, the last piece here we have is North Country Food Bank, and we're actually going to share an example of why that is next. But a few slides ago, recall that we had talked about that Polk County was actually a border county, and we know that there's plenty of other counties that are like that too, right? And so we didn't list them out here, but we know that because it's a border county right next to Grand Forks County in North Dakota, a lot of these same types of discipline categories could also be on this team. So already there could be dozens and dozens of folks on this team here in Polk County. Emily, you're on mute, sorry.
Typically when protocol teams come together, they do outline their goals and values. And we like to promote that as well when you're starting to engage virtually. So here's a quick list of what some of those values could look like for this protocol team in Polk County. And here are some of the goals that they would have as well. So for example, bringing awareness to exploitation, enhancing the relationships of community partners across those borders, increasing buy-in within different sectors, and then educating the community on protective factors for youth. So those might be some goals of protocol teams in this region based on the way the community looks and the values that they have as well. And we're going to skip over this piece as well. I'm so sorry. I would love to have folks guess what they think could happen virtually, but we're going to move on to our opportunities for virtual engagement to take place within this county. So there's 4 different options that we wanted to propose to you. So there's social media, a newsletter, PSA, and hybrid training. So first off, social media is a really great way for this community to engage virtually because through analysis of the MSS, they found that youth who trade sex are highly food insecure at 30%. That's very, very high. So they partner with Northwest Food Bank by co-creating posts educating about food insecurity and its intersections on exploitation. They do that on Instagram. Next, they may also sponsor posts promoting a food drive in the local community that the protocol team will be tabling at. So you can see here that we are integrating virtual and in-person methods together while also engaging with our community members.
And here, just as Emily was saying, we also have the option of engaging virtually through a newsletter. And so after we had the opportunity to examine some Minnesota student survey data, it was discovered that youth who trade sex are actually not participating in out-of-school activities in Polk County at the rate of 40%. So that's nearly half. And we know this is important because obviously if students who have lived experiences are able to engage within these spaces, we know that they would have more support systems, they would be connected to more resources, and then also these folks could pick up on the signs that these youth are in the life or at risk of being in the life. And so with this idea, it would be awesome if our Safe Harbor Protocol team in Polk County would create a newsletter to then partner with the general county, with potentially different school districts, community centers, YMCAs, whatever that might be, to really emphasize why we should have some more out-of-school programming and really cater that and advertise that to young folks as well. And the way we could do that is using MailChimp. We could really send out some routine newsletters to folks within these spaces and really encourage that we're going to try to have some out-of-school programming that's positive and able for youth to be in connection with parents, guardians, and other community members as well.
And next, there's the opportunity for this team to partner with a local media or radio to create a short PSA or public service announcement, spreading the messages that exploitation does exist in this community and it happens everywhere. So this aligns with their goal of increasing awareness and education on exploitation, but then they post it on the radio, social media, and more. So this helps with that culture change messaging that can really get down to the roots of prevention while also gathering buy-in and understanding of exploitation within the community. And also a great relationship builder with local media to partner with on future efforts.
And our final example here is hybrid training, which I know a lot of folks on this call are already experienced in doing, which is great to hear. But within this space, we can offer a hybrid option for training. And importantly, I think it would be great if that was recorded, just because when we are trying to do training sessions with folks, there's a lot of transitions. You might only be able to implement this 2 times a year. So if it is recorded, we know that folks coming on into a new role will be able to be familiar with the interworkings of your protocol and engagement within your community. And so really ensuring that this can be shared within your space and outside with your systems partners as well.
All right, so those were 4 really quick examples of ways that a protocol team, this case study over in Polk County, can engage virtually. So let's take a look on what we can kind of take away from this. So one of the ways that we thought about these 4 examples was by outlining the goals and values first of this protocol team, which is very key to beginning your virtual engagement journey. So first, you have to outline your goals and values.
Additionally, one really important factor we've been really trying to hit on is the idea that virtual engagement can just be used as a supplement to what you are already doing, all the great work you're already currently doing within the community. So figuring out those unique ways that you can make your current work, your current strategies even better in your community.
And finally, creating strategies that fit your goals as a team and then also help with the needs in the community. So we drew in some data from the MSS. You can garner some local data within your community to help guide the way that you create your strategies and the goals that you have as your team. All right, so how will you begin engaging virtually? As we start wrapping up here, feel free to drop into the chat how you plan to engage virtually. If there's anything that you took away from this presentation that you're going to bring with you to start your engagement. And I'll put that in the chat. Here we go. And we'll read that at the end. So like we said before, this was part 1 of our 2-part webinar series. Next time you can expect us going over some best practices for virtual engagement, identifying ways that capacity building and resources can take place, talking about accessibility and equity, and then lastly, evaluation, which is a really, really key piece to any effort or activity that you will take place in. So here, we're going to pause for the last 5 minutes and see if anybody has any questions. I'm also going to put our emails in the chat where you can contact us if you have any questions or need help with your virtual engagement or want to reach out about the presentation or whatever it may be. I will also put the link to our part 2 webinar in the chat as well, if you would like to register for that one. And then also, last but not least, we just said evaluation is really important. So I will also put a questionnaire in the chat. Please fill this out with your thoughts, feedback, things that you think we should do better, things that we should keep doing, whatever it may be. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm just going to scroll up to see if any folks have ideas on how they're going to start engaging virtually. And it looks like Annie said they're just starting. Congratulations on just starting. That's fantastic news. And they like the practice of recording trainings and having them available for new team members as they come on board. That's excellent to hear and a great practice to follow for your team. Hunter, is there anything else you'd like to add on this piece?
I don't believe so. I just think, again, hopefully some of these examples were really helpful to really be able to stretch and creatively think outside of the box with some of these ideas. I really loved our example of partnering with the local food bank, just because we know that youth are experiencing a lot of food insecurity. So really trying to utilize the data and information that might be available to you and how you can update or adapt your virtual engagement strategies a little bit more. But yes, we'd love to hear from folks and just want to say thanks so much for being able to join us today.
Yes, thank you all for joining us on this presentation. Thank you so much for your comments and feedback throughout this as well. We really appreciate your engagement. I am going to stop sharing my screen. Hunter and I are going to hang out here for the next couple of minutes and see if folks have any questions. Yeah, thank you.